All right. Welcome everyone to our second to last Elevate Lane County Working Wednesday in the spring series. Today's career readiness webinar in our entire spring series is sponsored by our partners at Selco. Thank you, Selco, for your dedication to student success. My name is Lizzie Gray and I'm a project coordinator for Connected Lane County. Each Wednesday for 2 more weeks, we will be joined by a local professional who will walk us through a different career readiness skill. Joining us today to tackle the topic of Interviewing 101 is Jennifer Adams from Northwest Community Credit Union. Thanks for being here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Jennifer Adams. I am the Director of People and Development from Northwest Community Credit Union. People and Development, it's a fancy term for HR.
I like that title though.
Yeah, we like our fancy titles around here for sure. But yeah, I've been with the credit union for almost 3 years now. So in 3 weeks I'll hit my 3-year anniversary. Yay! So
great.
Yeah.
Okay, so folks on the call, if you are here as a part of the hiring fair, the Elevate hiring fair, I'm going to drop a link into the chat box. Please follow that link to check in. It should take you 30 seconds max. We want to know who you are, what school you came from, and what your email is. This helps us track attendance, so then you can be entered into a prize drawing X amount of times depending on how often you came to the hiring fair events. So please follow that check-in link. And then just as a reminder to those of you who are joining us for the first time, we can't see or hear you as participants, but this webinar was designed for you and to answer your questions. So please type any questions that you have into the chat box, the Q&A feature, or raise your hand, and we can unmute you so you can ask Jennifer your question aloud. All right. Gentle reminder again, make sure that you fill out that check-in survey. Other than that, Jennifer, I will let you take it away.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully this works on the first try.
Kind of second try.
Yeah, second try. Yeah. All right.
Perfect.
Okay. So today we're talking about interviewing 101. So kind of the basics of interviewing, what to expect, how to prepare, and next steps after you complete that interview. So you've already seen me, I've already introduced myself. Just a little bit more background about myself. I've been in a human resources function for over 15 years. I was doing the calculation in my head and went, oh, wow, that's been a long time. But the nice thing about human resources is we do a lot of recruitment and we do a lot of interviewing. We provide a lot of support. We do a lot of coaching, both for our internal employees and for external employees to make sure that they're prepared and ready to go when it comes to that job interview. So with that, what you will find throughout this presentation is there's a lot about preparation. And I can't tell you how many times I have heard employees say, hey, I was so lucky getting this job. The reality is that they have done something either in their career or in the process of that interview process to prepare for it. And that's why they got it. It wasn't necessarily because they were lucky. So I happened to find this quote about preparation and luck, and I was like, perfect. I think this is a great way to explain how those people get lucky. It is that preparation meeting opportunity. So with that, let's talk about preparation, because this is really the key when it comes to interviewing. So first off is your pre-interview preparation. Usually what you're wanting to find out is what type of interview are you going to be participating in. Now, HR folks, they've got a lot on their plate. And so a lot of the processes, like when I first started going out into the workforce and interviewing, have gone from phone calls to emails, and you might not actually interact with a person to be able to ask all of these questions. So look for those clues if you do get automated emails about your interview when you're prepping for it. So interviews can range anywhere from a phone interview, a video interview, in person, group interviews, pre-recorded. There's actually interviews out there where you pre-record your answers and you send it in on video, or it could be a skills interview. So if you're going out to a shop floor, let's say, and doing a weld test. So there's a lot of different types of interviews out there. So if you have the opportunity to confirm with someone who has contacted you about an interview, ask them what type of interview it's going to be so you can be better prepared. Also ask who you'll be speaking with. I can't tell you how many times I get on the phone with someone and they'll say, "And who are you again?" And a lot of times it's because they've talked to a lot of folks. Totally understand that. They might not remember when we first connected to set up that interview, but really understanding who you're going to be talking with in the interview can help you out to make sure your answers are really relevant. So are you talking to HR? Typically HR is doing those initial phone screens. So we get, let's say, 20 to 100 applicants for a position. We screen those resumes and we say, okay, we want to talk to these 5 people. That's typically HR doing that initial contact to really make sure that it's a good fit for their skill set and the organization. Are you talking to the hiring manager? So the person you might ultimately be interacting with on a daily basis if you get the role. Or is it going to be a group of people? Are you participating in a panel interview? So you've got multiple folks that you're talking to at one time and understanding who those folks are and how they interact with this role day to day. Or is it completely someone else, which is always a possibility too. Also, make sure you understand how you need to be dressed for that interview. Regardless of the type of interview you have, you want to understand those dress expectations. So again, we in HR, recruiters, we love it when folks ask us, hey, what would be the appropriate way to dress for this? We really appreciate that preparation because it shows you're engaged and you're really interested in it. So for an office type interview, you might be wearing a nice top, jacket, blazer, whatever the case may be. When you're doing an interview, you might have what I like to call the COVID-19 workplace mullet at the moment, where it's business on top. And like me, you might be in leggings and tennis shoes, but you can't tell right now. And that's the beauty of working from home. Lizzie knows what I'm talking about. Also, if you're interviewing for, let's say, a skills interview and it's on a shop floor, really understanding the appropriate safety dress is important. So do you need to wear boots so that you can have steel-toed covers on your boots to safely go out onto the shop floor, have a tour of the shop floor, or even do that skills test if it's welding? And I came from the manufacturing environment before I was at the credit union, so you'll hear me talk about manufacturing quite a bit. And then also understanding how long the interview is. So that really helps you manage your time and manages the interviewer's time. So we all have limited time nowadays. And so if you have this long list of questions you want to ask, and you know that it's a 30-minute interview and you've got 5 minutes left, that will really help you understand how many questions you can ask and really target the questions you're most interested in. Also, right now, we're dealing with COVID. We're going to be dealing with COVID for a little bit longer here, unfortunately. So it's really important that if you know it's an in-person interview, confirm what those safety protocols are for that environment. Most likely, you're going to need to wear a mask to keep everyone safe and sound. So I'd recommend, if that is the case and you're not used to wearing a mask for an extended period of time and talking, if you haven't done that yet, it's tough. It's really hard to do. You get choked up sometimes. You need to take, some water in. That's okay. Practice doing that. Wear your mask for an extended period of time while having a conversation with an individual so you can prep yourself and get used to that, because it's uncomfortable talking in a mask for a long time. But a lot of interviews do need to be in person, even with COVID. So that's some of the pre-interview preparation you can do once you get that call or email that you have been selected for an interview. And also, don't forget to celebrate. That is a big hurdle. There are a lot of applications out there. And so if you've been called for an interview, that truly is something to celebrate. In addition to those preps and questions to ask once you do get that call, there's some additional learning that you should also be doing. So a lot of times when you're looking for a new role, you're probably sending in multiple applications, and you might even be, and something I truly do recommend, customizing your resume for each application you're sending out there. So it's really important as you're doing your prep work that you have a solid understanding for the role you applied for you're double checking that posting, you're looking at the resume, and you're really trying to gain an understanding of the organization. So this is kind of my pro tip for you. When you do apply for a role, save a copy of that job posting. You might find that when you get the call for the interview, that job posting has been pulled down. A lot of employers, they go out, they post the job, they get their applications, then they shut it down, they screen, and then they call people for interviews. So by the time you get that call for the interview, that job posting might not be up for you to look at again. So if you've got a saved copy somewhere, that will get you ahead of the game on really remembering and reminding yourself what it was, the job description or job posting you applied for. Also, reviewing your resume is really important. So sometimes these recruitment efforts take a long time. And so you may have done something in between the time that you sent in your resume and the time you get called. And it's something that you might want to call out because it's very specific to the job that you've applied for. So make sure you have a really clear understanding of the resume they've looked at so you can speak to that and then also add to it at time of interview. And if you are kind of like a super organization nerd like I am, and I am, trust me, I am like crazy organized when it comes to this stuff, save a copy of your job posting plus your application that you sent in with that job posting. So kind of organize your, if it's folders, paper, whatever the case may be, so that you know exactly what you sent in, especially if you're doing that customization for each application out there. It's just gonna better prepare you. And again, making sure you really understand the organization as best you can. You know, go on their website. If you know someone there, give them a call, see if they can't give you any insight about the organization. That is really helpful. And one of the things that, again, as a recruiter, we get so excited about when someone starts talking to us and they're using our language that's out on the website. So at the credit union, one of our core values is making an organization where people can flourish personally and professionally. So when we hear candidates talk about, I want to be at a place where I can flourish, that's the trigger to us that they've done some research and they know a little bit about our core values. They might not understand it 100%, and that's okay. It's not expected, but they know the language or the common language that might be used at the organization. All right. And then additional prep you can do, draft questions to ask ahead of time. So every interviewer, I shouldn't say every because everyone's different, but most interviews will ask you at the end of it, what questions do you have? And it's really tough sometimes in the moment to come up with a question to ask. So this is where all that learning you just did as part of your preparation really comes into play. So as you're reviewing that job description, your resume, and the organization, start drafting some questions that you can answer by your review. Again, we love questions. It really shows that you're engaged with the role. So if I'm doing an interview and at the end of the interview, someone said, and I ask if there's any questions and they say, nope, I'm good, I actually really get worried. I'm wondering, do you really want the role? Are you engaged in the process? But at the same time, I do recognize sometimes when you're going through that interview process, the questions you had got answered. We as interviewers are natural talkers. We will talk as much as we can sometimes. And so sometimes we'll talk about, you know, the why behind the position being open or what we're looking for. It's like, oh my goodness, those are all the questions I had. So here is the question that I would recommend everyone jot down because we love this question. So this is my favorite question ever. Is there anything you were hoping to learn about me that you haven't from the questions I've answered?
Oh, that's a great one.
That gives them, I love that one. It is so good because it makes the interviewer stop and say, oh, I might have had some questions here or something specific about this individual that none of my questions really answered. Now I have that opportunity to ask that question. So I'm going to repeat that one more time. It's just so everyone can get that down. Is there anything you were hoping to learn about me that you haven't from the questions you've asked? Again, one of my favorites. I had an applicant ask me that, and I use that so often now. Not that I'm out looking for new jobs, but
Right,
yeah,
no.
yeah. But yeah, I love that one.
like
I
it.
use it in my day-to-day conversations when I'm having internal conversations too.
That's great.
So that's all the prep. So as you can see, that is a lot of preparation that you're doing. And now you're there the day of the interview. So I'm guessing that some of you are thinking about that first interview and you're going, butterflies. I'm feeling a little nervous here. First thing, remember to breathe. Breathing is so important. We all get nerves. Even those of us that are interview pros that have been out there interviewing for years, even the interviewers get nervous. So it's so important to take those deep breaths. It's okay to pause and center yourself. That is absolutely okay. I still remember the first interview I was a part of as an interviewer. I was so nervous. I was visibly more nervous than the person being interviewed because I wanted to do right by them.
Oh my gosh.
So it goes both ways. So you might have in front of you this friendly team of HR professionals on video. This is my team. This was at the beginning of the pandemic. We were having a little bit of fun with backgrounds for fun. But the thing I want you to remember as you're interviewing, that we're people too as interviewers. We are goofy just like the rest of us. We've got hobbies. We go hiking. This is me and my husband hiking. We have animals that we love that, might be interrupting our conversation sometimes. I made ours go sequester while we were on this call. And sometimes when we're stuck inside during Halloween on the pandemic, we do weird things. So again, we dress up as narwhals for fun. So again, just remember, we're all humans. We're here to have a conversation and learn about each other. And remember to breathe. It is so important to remember to breathe. So during the interview, again, the whole point of the interview is to get to know you and understand how you're a good fit for the role and make sure we're providing you the information you need to make that decision for yourself too. It's really a conversation back and forth. So when you're responding, take your time. Don't feel like you have to fill up empty, quiet space. Let the interviewer know that you're considering your answer too. That is absolutely okay. We want a thoughtful answer. We don't want a bunch of filler words just to fill in the quiet time. So if you need to take that moment, just say, hey, I need a moment to think about it. A-okay. And if you're unsure about what's being asked, I have asked some really weird questions in my life as a recruiter. And I don't know why I do it. It sounded good when I wrote the question and then I ask it and someone looks at me like I'm crazy. So go ahead and ask for that clarification. It's okay. I've been in an interview before and said, oh my gosh, that is not what I meant to say as I was saying that out loud. It happens. Also, when you're answering questions, try to go beyond a yes or no answer. So if you're asked, let's say, do you know how to use Microsoft Word? And the answer is yes, great. But then expand upon that. Give an example of how you've used the Microsoft Word in the past in something you've done. And if you can tie it to how you think it'll be used in the job you're applying for, extra bonus points. But really, the goal is to answer beyond that yes and no, if possible. Sometimes it's not, and that's okay. So just another little tip there that we like. And then it's time to ask your questions at end of the interview. So this is where you've got that draft list of questions available and you're getting ready to ask them. Also, if you learn something new that you weren't expecting, don't feel like you have to stay on script, or if the questions were answered that you have to ask those questions again. Because again, I would worry if, hey, we talked about that and now you're asking the question again, did you not understand what I was talking about? Maybe you weren't listening. So again, don't feel like you have to answer or ask every single question you have. That's just your prep. And if the interview hasn't already told you by the end of asking all your questions, ask what next steps look like for the interview process and when to expect to hear from them. Because now you're excited, you've got that interview. Hopefully you're like, yep, this is the role for me. I want it so bad. But understanding their timeline and expectations is going to be really key. Again, HR departments are really busy, especially right now. And so it's hard for us to filter a lot of incoming calls to find out where people are at in the process. So if you get that expectation up front and you know, hey, in a week you said you were going to call me, I haven't heard from you, now I'm checking in, that's beautiful because expectations have been set and that HR recruiter missed it for whatever reason. And so now we know, oh, that's why they're checking in. So post interview. So thank you letters. We love thank you letters. Thank you notes are so appreciated. A lot of employees are working offsite right now. So email thank you notes are perfectly acceptable and pretty much the norm, even pre-pandemic. But at the same time, it's pretty rare we get a paper thank you. And so that when we do get those paper thank you cards, I've got mine tacked up on my wall at the office. I do truly appreciate the time and effort people put in when they do those thank you cards. So if that's something you would like to do, don't hesitate to do that. Just make sure that in that interview, you're asking where you could send that thank you note. So who would be the best person to send this information to? And if you've had a lot of interactions via an applicant tracking system, which is how most of us apply for jobs nowadays, you could probably just respond to those emails that you've had before if they're unable or maybe they're unwilling. Sometimes it does happen to provide direct contact information. You can just reply to those responses within the system. And again, don't hesitate to check in. Just make sure that you've set those timeline expectations so that you know when you should be checking in to find out when the next steps are happening. So those are kind of my recommendations for interviewing 101 and getting started.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. So,
absolutely.
Okay, I see there's a couple things in the chat. So the question I see is from Frankie. If you have some accommodations and want to use them, could you add some of those accommodations? Frankie, I don't think I fully understand what you mean by accommodations. Could you elaborate here for just a second? So take a minute to type out maybe a brief explanation just so we can answer the question that you are asking. And I'll address another question that we got through the Q&A feature. And the question was, for those of you here for the hiring fair, should we be applying to those jobs that we learned about? And the answer is the biggest yes I can give you. You had week 1, week 2, and now week 3 to apply for those jobs. So try your best to get applications in by Friday. Interviews are being scheduled during the week of May 10, which is next week. So if you haven't applied already and you intend to, make sure that you get those applications in. Okay. And Frankie, maybe it would be easier too if you raised your hand and asked your question aloud. So feel free to do that too. Brianna asks, if the company you're interviewing with isn't doing a skilled/working interview, just a sit-down interview, is it appropriate to ask for a tour of the company?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually when I'm interviewing and I know I'm near the final round, that's when I typically am asking for a tour. So typically it would be more appropriate to ask or check to see if that's an option when you know you're near the end of that or one of the final folks. Maybe even you have an offer on the table and you're like, hey, can I get a tour of the location now? Absolutely appropriate. Probably not so much at the very beginning of the process. And it is a little bit harder now with COVID-19 also, but absolutely appropriate. And the worst they can say is, no, we don't do that. And that's okay, but at least you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So when, I understand when in the process you should ask, but is it when you sit down maybe for your third interview, or is it an email that should go out before a second or third interview?
Yeah, I would say ask it in the interview process itself when you're in front of someone to express that interest, or if you think of it after the fact, and maybe you didn't even realize you were at the end of the interview process, that's when an email or phone call would be a great option too.
Okay, wonderful. That sounds great. Another one from Brianna. When it's your turn as the applicant to ask questions, is it okay to ask about the wage if it wasn't posted or said yet?
Absolutely. So our worlds have changed recently because of the Oregon Equal Pay Act, and it's allowed for a lot more pay transparency. So for one, I'm just going to put it out there. Employers should not be asking you what you've made previously if you've had a previous job. That is not an okay question for an employer to ask. You as an applicant can absolutely ask that question. Now, you might find some hesitancy with some employers. Some employers are still learning about how to deal with that question and what answer to give. So they might tell you, it's dependent on your knowledge, skills, and abilities or experience. And I know that can be really frustrating. You're like, okay, but what is it? Hopefully they will disclose that to you. Reality is they don't have to disclose anything to you until they get that offer to you. Hopefully more employers are going to start posting that.
Okay, but that's not something that would be interpreted negatively as
No,
an interviewer. No,
absolutely not. No.
Great.
You might find some people wiggling in the interview though, because they might be uncomfortable with the question because they're still learning about pay transparency themselves.
Okay.
And that's okay.
Okay, great. So I loved the slide about breathing. I think often when I find myself in an interview or when I have a presentation to give that I'm nervous about, I literally forget to breathe. And so then I'm trying to catch my breath as I'm speaking, and it's just a disaster. So great question. I fully endorse the idea of pausing before you answer a question to catch your breath, to think through the answer to your question. It doesn't look as awkward as it might feel to you. But what are some things, Jennifer, that you might recommend someone doing pre-interview to calm their nerves?
So that is where I would recommend getting in front of someone you can practice with.
Okay.
So when I was in high school, college, they usually gave like a set of standard questions. Where do you want to be in 5 years? And that's the one that always comes to mind because no one ever actually asks that question in an interview. It's like, but I prepped for that question. Come on, why are you doing this for me? So what I would really recommend doing is getting in front of someone you're comfortable with, letting them know about the role, and then just having them ask you some questions on the fly so that you can be prepared to answer questions that you're not prepared for, which I know sounds really odd, but the reality is there are no standard interview questions anymore. There never really were. And so being able to kind of work on the fly, practicing that pausing and thinking of what to answer the question with is really going to be the best way to really calm those nerves, that practice piece of it.
Okay, that's great. Do you think that humor is okay in an interview, or are there any tips to help me communicate my personality?
I love that question. Humor is absolutely okay. Typically, what you find, it probably happens more often in our group or panel interviews because we're playing off of each other as individuals and we know each other really well. So making little jokes along the way, absolutely. If you like telling jokes, just be careful about that, kind of learn how to read the room. And if you're not sure if you can read the room, you might want to stay away from that. But if you feel comfortable reading the room, workplace appropriate type humor, not the end of the world by any means.
Awesome. I have a question. So obviously I have one of these Zoom backgrounds and you do not. As an interviewer, do you have a preference, or when would you encourage students to use a background?
Yeah. So my preference is if you've got a clean background behind you, don't worry about the virtual background.
Okay.
If you don't have a setup, let's say you're kind of more in an open area. Maybe you have, again, my dogs are sequestered. You have a little puppy that likes to come and say hi on the video.
Yeah.
That's where that virtual background might be really helpful for you. For me personally, I haven't done the virtual background because it's a way for me to invite people into my quote unquote office now and see who I am. This is how I transmit some of my personality and who I am. But again, I'm fortunate. I have a nice space that I'm able to kind of set things up. Not everyone has that opportunity, and that's absolutely okay. And that's where your virtual background is a great option.
Okay, fabulous. Another question about these, Zoom or Teams interviews. So my partner was interviewing in the winter, and he is familiar with Zoom, not familiar with Microsoft Teams. And he was actually interviewing at a credit union, and they set up his interview through Teams. And he was really nervous because he'd never navigated that platform before, and he wanted to be as prepared as possible. do you have any suggestions for maybe how a student could make themselves more comfortable with different platforms before interviewing?
Yeah, a lot of those platforms, when you are outside of the organization itself, will send a test link so
Oh,
that you can practice. If
nice.
it doesn't come with a test link, ask to have one sent your way,
That's
and
great.
it can be set up that way. So it might be just a brief little invite where you have someone from the company that pops on, or it could be just interaction virtually with the website or the vendor that's hosting that particular platform.
Okay, fantastic. I felt for him because I was like, you've never used this platform before. And luckily my
Yep.
mom had, and so we set up a fake interview. But
Nice.
I like that they have test links. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Frankie has clarified, and they say, I'm not sure if this helps. Say if you want to work as a teacher, a job, say you want to work as a teacher, a job related to a teacher, you want to use an accommodation of a locker with an adapted lock. Could you use that in your interview? So if potentially, like if you come to an interview and you need some type of accommodation, or you need a locker, or you need water or something like that, um,
Mhm.
let's let's assume until Frankie corrects us that that's what they mean.
Yeah, yeah. If you are needing some form of accommodation, you absolutely should speak up and let the interviewer know that. We want to make sure that we are serving everyone that we're speaking to so that they can come in their best way. So that could be a physical accommodation. Perhaps you don't have a computer with a video camera.
Right.
Maybe you have only a cell phone that can do that, or maybe you don't even have that. You need to speak up and let them know that so that they can get you the equipment you need. So where maybe video interview is the norm and they find out, oh, you don't have the equipment for that, let's go ahead and bring you in. It's better to know that information ahead of time
Yeah.
so that we can be prepared to help that individual.
I would also say too that what we forget as the interviewees is that we're also interviewing a company. So if you write back to an organization and you say, you know, I'm so thrilled to have an interview, but I don't have X, Y, and Z to make this possible. Can you help me? And they can't. That's indicative to me that that might not be the company that you want to work for if they're not willing to be accommodating at all. So just a little note. We have
Yep.
another question here that's actually, it ties in really nicely to a question I was going to ask about you and Northwest Community Credit Union. This person says that they have applied a couple times to your credit union, but they haven't successfully gotten through to the next round. So what do you and what does Northwest Community Credit Union look for in applicants?
Yeah. So, biggest thing for us is, does the cover letter, we love cover letters, by the
Okay.
way. We don't get a lot of cover letters, but when we do, we love them.
Okay.
Does that explain why they're applying and how they think their skill set matches? So let's say you've been a barista for years and years and years, and now you're wanting to be a teller. Help us understand how that skill set applies to the role that you are applying for.
Great.
So if you don't have that direct experience, that's where the cover letter is your friend.
Okay.
Also, make sure, especially for Northwest, that you are customizing your resume for the job you're applying for. I can't tell you how many resumes we've received where the objective is, I want to be a, we'll say teacher, and they're applying for a teller role. And we're like, oh, they don't want to work here then.
Right.
We actually sometimes wonder, is there another reason why they applied? Maybe it's not because the job they want, there's something else going on there. And so making sure that that resume really ties in to the role, so that we know why you're applying. Otherwise, again, we get, I have a opening right now. I had 125 applicants.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. So if there's anything that's a little off,
Right.
or lack of information, we're just going to have to move on,
Okay.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's all right. Do your homework and do your prep work, and maybe you'll have
Yes.
chances to get through. That's great. Okay, great. I just asked that question. Oh, there's one here from Brianna, along the same lines as accommodations. How do you communicate accommodations for the job position itself during the interview? So how do you learn about or any accommodations you'd need for the job?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, if you are needing an accommodation to do the role, you should be letting that interviewer know so that they're aware of it.
Okay.
So, as an example, I've interviewed an individual before that suffered from dyslexia.
Hmm.
And so they needed a text to speech software in order to do the job successfully. And so they let us know, hey, just so you know, in order to do this, I would need this type of equipment.
Okay.
Now, as an employer, I can't say, oh, no, okay, I can't hire you now because of
Right.
that. That is not okay to do. But if you were to say, hey, my job, I can't do the majority of the job and there's no accommodation that will make me able to do the job, but I still want it,
Hmm.
typically an employer can't move forward at that point in
Okay.
time. So it needs to be something, that's reasonable to accommodate and that's very generic, I know. So that the more transparency you have in that so that the employer understands the needs, the better.
Okay, that makes sense. And that helps, I think, too, those of us on the call recognize that transparency is key and not to be afraid to let the employer know what we need.
Yeah.
Right.
And to Lizzie's point, if all of a sudden the employer goes, I don't want to work with you around that, that's again your indication that that probably isn't the employer you want to work for.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I don't know if you can narrow it down to three, but top three tips for making an excellent first impression.
Aha. So let's see. For me,
Hmm.
it would be curiosity,
Great.
really showing curiosity around the organization and the role, not why it would just be great for you.
Okay.
So you want me because I'm perfect. Great.
Right.
Bye.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, Showing how you've learned about the industry. So
Okay.
not just the organization, but the industry can be really important because it can also show a level of interest and curiosity. It's kind of the same thing, I know, but again, showing that capacity to learn and be
Mhm.
engaged, again, really, really good. And then let's see, last one that I really like when I hear about it is when I hear that they've reached out to other people that they like a friend of a friend
Mhm.
or a coworker used to work with this person and this is how I learned about you as an organization. So
Okay.
they're using their network contacts and built relationships to learn about the organization, especially on the credit union side. That's so important. Every single role we have here is about building relationships. So if you're able to demonstrate how you built those relationships in the past and how you utilize them,
Mhm.
kudos. That's
Okay.
awesome for us.
And I'm thinking of students, and I don't know that in high school I'd built a lot of social capital or a network. And so I'm
Mhm.
thinking, I feel like if I was a student and I knew I had an interview at Seneca Sawmill and
Mhm.
I personally didn't know anybody, I might tap on everyone, my coach, my teacher, my pastor, whoever, to just say, hey, do you know anything about Seneca Sawmill? And chances are, because we live in a pretty small community, someone in a network somewhere is going to have worked there, and maybe you could chat on the phone for 5 minutes with them to learn more about their experience at the company. So
Absolutely. I like that tip. That's a great one.
thinking through that one. Frankie, if you apply for more than one job, can you use the same resume over and over again? How often do you need to update your resume?
So you absolutely can use the same resume over and over again. Just be careful and make sure that that resume you're using over and over again isn't super specific in terms of key things. So again, if you have an objective on your resume and it says my objective is to be a teacher and you apply for a teller role,
Mm-hmm.
that's could be problematic.
Yeah.
But if it's generic and it's like I'm looking to expand my career opportunities, or maybe there's not even an objective on there,
Right.
it's just all of your history as an employee or events that you've been a part of, then no problems there. How often to update your resume? I would say anytime something that has relevantly changed in your history, update it. So we actually recommend, even as you're a current employee with an organization, let's use that as an example, update your resume. Keep it up to date because you never know when you might need to use that internally for an internal job opportunity. Or as a student, if you participate in an event and it was a really meaty event that could be really cool to talk to an employer about, add that on your resume. I have, again, remember, I'm nerdy organizational person, but I have a real-time resume that I just randomly throw stuff on, and then I start changing it for when I'm ready to apply to a different organization. So I don't forget anything, because I will forget if I don't write it down.
Totally.
That's how life works.
Right. And often when you're applying for a job, you have to think about so many different things that then to have to sit down and sit there and be like, okay, what have I done in the last 2 years or the last year? It can be overwhelming. So give yourself, just give yourself a chance I love that idea, Jennifer. My mom at some point told me every 3 months to be updating my resume. And I was like, oh, I don't know that I do enough that there's something to say, but it's helpful.
Yes, it is very helpful.
So I'm going to put a last call out there to all of the students tuning in. This is the last call for questions. I have 2 more for Jennifer, but I really want to get to yours. So start typing away if you have any questions for her. Okay, so we talked about the question of where do you want to be in 5 years, and how, you might have prepared an answer for that, and then they don't ask that question because they never ask that question. What are some questions that you can almost guarantee will be asked in an interview for an entry-level job?
Yeah. Why are you looking for a new job?
Okay.
Or a job, one or the other, new or a job. Why are you interested in this role?
Okay.
And why are you interested in our company?
Okay.
Those will almost every time be asked on an interview.
Okay. That's
because
great.
it really helps us get a good feel for, one, are you a good fit for the role, and are you truly interested in it?
Totally. So why a job? Why this role? Why our company? Okay. Yep. Memorize those ones, and those are the ones to practice in the mirror. Okay. Last question, unless any students chime in. Jennifer, what do you wish you had known about interviewing when you were in high school?
That there was no such thing as a standard interview. Absolutely. Again, I'm telling you, that list, I keep going back to that list they gave me to practice, and I was like, no one asked me these questions. I really wish that someone had told me this was a conversation between 2 humans trying to get to know each other that know nothing about each other.
Okay.
That would have changed my perspective completely, because I am not an actor in any way, shape, or form. Play poker with me, you will win. And so if I try to take a question and memorize an answer, I end up being very stiff, and I'm not natural in the conversation at all. Okay. So just knowing, having that conversation, we're the humans that wear the narwhal costumes on Halloween because we're nerds. That would have been so helpful to me.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you, Jennifer, so very much for your time and insight today. That was excellent, and I'm so happy that everyone on the call got to ask what they wanted to ask you in preparation for the interview week next week. Friendly reminder, folks on the call, make sure that you are applying or have applied for the hiring fair jobs that you're interested in. Companies will be in touch if they have not been already to schedule those interviews with you, and our team will follow up in a few weeks to see how they went. So have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. And thanks again, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me. Good luck, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.